and Moise Kande as well. And so where Mr. Tinubu comes in is that he was effectively their bagman. He was laundering money for Akande and I guess for Agbele indirectly as well. And he was using bank accounts in his name and also in his wife's name that were both in Illinois and in, I believe, like Virginia, and then also in London. So he had a sizable network of bank accounts that he could use to obfuscate the origins of this cash.
Time London is coming up, so this is pretty interesting.
It gets more interesting. So the case that was opened in 1992 is notable because it does not charge Tinubu as a criminal defendant. So when Bola Tinubu has said, I think publicly, that he has never been criminally charged for these actions, he's correct. That was a criminal case against not the suppliers of the drugs. And I'm sorry if you hear some noise. They're apparently cutting down a tree nearby. Perfect timing, of course. But he was involved because, again, in the civil forfeiture action, they're going after the stuff. They're not going after the person. So he was the owner of the bank accounts that were seized by the United States. And interesting, I didn't know this, but when the United States seizes cash in your bank account, they don't take it and spend it on anything. What they do is they actually destroy the cash. So the cash was turned over to the Federal Reserve Bank, which issues United States dollars, for the Federal Reserve to destroy. So the technical reasons for that, I guess, are that that cash never should have been used for that in the first place. But I did not know that was actually how they handled it. I'm not sure if that's still the same today or if that's just how they did it back then. But anyway, going back to this 1992 criminal case, there were the participants in the ring in Indiana were the ones charged in that case, but they did not charge Tinubu, they did not charge Agbele, and they did not charge Akande in that case. The Nigerian side of that, the suppliers, I'm not sure if they thought that might be appropriate for future criminal prosecution, and so they wanted to hold off, or if there was another reason why they decided, we've got enough right here with the direct, drug trafficking defendants. We don't want to also include those in this case. So the reason that I was able to start understanding all of this was because of David Hundeyin's article, which I found when I started looking at this case that the Nigerian public had been requesting. And, based on David's article, I started to think, there are some questions I have about this whole situation. It's fascinating. Like, the U.S. government was clearly very much involved. There's an affidavit in the 1993 case from this IRS special agent, Kevin Moss, and he lays out the evidence against Bola Tinubu very clearly in that affidavit. He essentially accuses him of committing, by my count, at least 6 federal crimes. And I still didn't quite understand the relationship between the 1992 case and the 1993 case, and I wanted to know more. And I thought probably the public also wanted to know more. So I contacted David and I said, I think this might be a situation where it makes sense to file some FOIA requests. FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act, which is a federal law in the United States, which allows you to petition the government for access to documents. And sometimes you get them and sometimes you don't. And it can be a very long and contentious kind of process because the way that the government handles FOIA is extremely rigid. There's, it is a federal law. If you go to Title V of the United States Code, which concerns the sort of civil bureaucracy, and then you look at Section 552, that is the Freedom of Information Act, as codified in the law. And it has a number of different sections and subsections, and some of those subsections are the various exemptions that the government can say, we're not going to release this information to you because it is exempt from disclosure. And there's something like, 15 or 20 different exemptions. They're all given different names based on the subsections that they're in. And so you have to sort of navigate between the different exemptions to make sure that the information you're asking for can actually get disclosed. And now, so this is where it starts to get really in the nitty gritty for the documents that were just released, because many people are probably wondering, why is it that the cover page from the FBI says this is a set of requests about Bola Tinubu, and yet there's not a single page in these documents that they've released so far that says the word Tinubu. Why is that? Well, the reason why is because this is a long process and it's just beginning, but we are starting to have this fight now in court about what are the exemptions and do they apply in this situation. So, for example, one of the exemptions that the government is citing is called exemption B7C, and that refers to a subsection B, and then there's a subsection 7, and then in subsection 7 there's A, B, C, D, E, and F. And C refers to personal privacy. There can be circumstances where the government does not think it's appropriate to release information because if it's about a random person on the street, you don't necessarily want to implicate them in some sort of criminal investigation, especially if they are innocent and they didn't do anything wrong. There's no reason necessarily to expose them to that kind of scrutiny. Now, that's one example, but in a different example, you have somebody who is an alleged criminal who's become the president of a nation of 200 million people. In that case, it may be a little bit different, and you might argue that exemption B7C does not apply. And so that's the kind of argument that we're going to start seeing now in court, because on my side, I'll be arguing that I don't think that exemption is appropriate. And I've already started to make that argument, in fact. And on the government side, they're going to consult with the different agencies and figure out what justification, if any, the agencies have to cite that exemption. Now, sometimes they do it just because they get thousands and thousands of FOIA requests each year. And after a while, you sort of get in the habit of saying the same thing in response to all of them, even if maybe it's not exactly appropriate. I'm not sure if that's what happened here or if they had a really definitive reason why they thought that that was appropriate, but that's just one of many exemptions that they're citing. So if you actually look at that first page, the FBI's cover letter, there's a set of checkboxes, this is how they tell you what exemptions they're citing. They'll check off which ones are the ones that they are invoking. And they've checked a number of them. They checked B3, which is an exemption that lets them cite other laws, so they can sort of point to other places in the United States Code that would allow them to withhold information. And two of the laws that they're pointing to, they've listed 3. 2 of them relate to wiretaps, because what happened in this investigation, and I should mention, the investigation that these documents describe started in 1990. So it was a pretty thorough investigation. They started investigating in 1990. They didn't file criminal charges until 1992. So there was about a 2-year period there where they were just monitoring this drug ring. And they didn't deal with the civil forfeiture issues with Tinubu until 1993. So this was something, that's a lot of resources on the government's part. It's something they took fairly seriously, it seems. But yeah, so the first 2 laws they cite for exemption B3 concern wiretaps, because they got what's called a Title III wiretap to monitor the telephones of Lee Andrew Edwards and his various co-conspirators, co-defendants. And there's a lot of different laws in the US involving when it is illegal to have a wiretap, when it is not, what you can do, how long it can be active for. You have to go to a judge to get, I believe it's a warrant the judge has to sign off on. You have to have probable cause. There's a lot of steps for the federal government to go through in order to convince a judge that, yes, we should be allowed to intrude on the privacy of this individual or set of individuals because we think a crime is being committed. And so when it comes to disclosing information about that wiretap, even if it's 30 years later, as it is now, there's still a lot of laws that they have to navigate around. So one of the things that may happen in this case is that I may have to send in a formal request saying any wiretap that took place in the context of this investigation, we think that you, the judge, Your Honor, we believe that you should sort of waive the privacy laws around that wiretap so we can learn more about what happened. Because, after 30 years, it's very unlikely that anyone's privacy is going to be further impacted.
Right.
So I've been talking a lot. Why don't you let me know if you have questions or if other people have questions? I can try to answer some.
I have, it's a lot of questions, but I would rather ask a lot. Here in Nigeria, social media, there has been a lot of conversation in regards to this FBI files, and now having this live, we realize that it's deeper than we thought. So some of the questions that I've been able to gather, I would rather take those ones first and then take questions from the comment section. So one of the questions that I have here is this information, right? It varies. So how do we put this? So the whole Bola Ahmed Tinubu case, the FOIA case, how does it affect the American judiciary system? How big is this in the American space? Is it much of a big deal in the US as it is here in Nigeria? I mean, we're talking about president of a nation. So how is this,
I think there's a couple different ways to answer that. One is to look at how the news coverage has been, and there actually has not been any news coverage in the United States about this. So far as I can tell, there are articles about Nigeria and about Tinubu from time to time. A lot of them are in business publications because there are sort of a very large number of business interests that concern Nigeria, oil being one of them. And so you'll see coverage about what's going on politically in Bloomberg, for example. But this case has sort of escaped the attention of the U.S. media, and I think it's partly due to the fact that U.S. media doesn't tend to write very much about Africa relative to Europe or even Australia, which I think is partly due to racism. But
hey, that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty straightforward. There's a certain assumption that Africa does not matter among news editors, and I don't think that's true. I think that Africa does matter, and that especially when you hear on the news internationally, often BBC will cover Africa a lot more than U.S. news outlets. So BBC will report on various sort of violent acts or terrorist attacks or wars that are going on in Africa more often than U.S. news sources. And when you hear that, that's connected to the leaders of those countries. And obviously, Bola Tinubu now is recognized as the leader of Nigeria. So, I think it's important in that sense, even if the news here in the U.S. is not covering it as much. But to answer your question a different way, is this important in the U.S.? From a different perspective, I think it's a very important case because whenever you have a case in a United States court, especially a federal court, there's the possibility that if something new comes up that the court hasn't really seen before, that could form a precedent, meaning different word than precedent. Precedent is when a case informs how a future case will be handled, because courts operate on a principle called stare decisis, and it means that they like to do the same thing again and again. They're big fans of tradition. So if you got a case before you and you've handled it in a certain way in the past, that's probably how you're going to handle it this time, is how a judge tends to think. So the thing about this case is that you've got a FOIA request about a world leader who is an active sitting world leader. And I have looked through other cases that could be similar to that. And there's not a lot of examples of FOIA cases where someone is making a request about a world leader and the government is saying, actually, we'd rather not say much about that. So if anything happens in this case, it's possible it could form a precedent for future cases involving FOIA requests about world leaders, and that could be very important because, you know, usually when world leaders are involved, people care. So I do think it's quite important in that regard.
Okay, so my next question is related to the narrative of this case. So it says, you know, here there are a lot of conversations. It says, oh, there are no FBI files, the law enforcement records being public. You know, this person is a public figure. His records should not be made public. The files do not matter at all. You know, what is your take about those narratives? That it's the
Right.
files never in the first place and it should never have been public.
Well, to start with, there are files. The FBI does have files about Bola Tinubu that we know for sure. So for that matter, does the DEA, and at one point the IRS also did. It just unfortunately seems to be the case that the IRS has destroyed all of its files because it has a retention policy that says that after 10 years you can destroy this stuff. And, you know, it's been 30 years, so it's not too surprising that some of these agencies have started to destroy records. You know, there are a number of narratives out there I've seen in Nigerian media, and part of the reason I wanted to do this is because I want to make the facts very clear for people. You know, I've been called a surrogate and an agent of various, I guess, competitors politically with Mr. Tinubu, and I think I need to say very clearly that that is false. I do not work for anybody. I work for myself. The only funding that I've received for this case is that David was kind enough to pay the filing fee for the lawsuit of $402. And I thought that was appropriate because, you know, I contacted him to help him with his journalism. He wrote a fantastic article about the Tinubu situation, and I thought these FOIA requests could help his reporting. So, you know, I haven't spoken with representatives, to the best of my knowledge, of any Nigerian political campaign. I've received an inquiry from an attorney who said that a Nigerian group would pay for his time. He couldn't be certain about who was really paying him, so I said, no, thank you. I don't work for anyone. I'm doing this because I am interested in it, and I think it matters because people using my site, using Plain Sight, are interested in it. So I hope that clears up that line of inquiry. As far as whether the records matter or not, I mean, that's really up to the Nigerian people. That's not up to me or anyone else. I think if Nigeria as a nation believes that these records provide evidence that, you know, its leaders are not up to the standards that people expect, then, you know, people can protest, people can go to court, people can, you know, exercise civil disobedience. They can handle that however they like, but the facts are what they are. And, you know, the fact is that Mr. Tinubu was involved with this heroin trafficking ring in the 1990s. And the questions that are outstanding are simply why he wasn't criminally prosecuted and why his co-conspirators weren't criminally prosecuted. I think that is a open and very interesting question.
Right. Okay. Guys, if you see me looking at the bottom, I'm going through questions and the questions are here. So,
and if you see me looking off to the side, it's because I'm not really used to this whole live thing. So sorry if I look like I'm totally distracted. I'm still getting used to it.
And okay, so my next question is the process. Everyone wants to know the process of this whole appeal of the FOIA case. So please take us a bit into the journey.
Well, so it's funny. There's a book by Franz Kafka called Der Prozess in German, and it refers to how Byzantine courts can be, and there's definitely a process here. So courts in the United States are extremely focused on procedure. There's the substance of a case. You know, in this instance, it's, you know, what happened with Bola Tinubu. That's the obvious question. But that sort of gets lost in all the procedure. The procedure is governed by a set of rules. The rules are extremely important. called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. There's also Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, but this is a civil case. So referring to the FOIA case that I filed. So the filings that you see in court, those are all governed by the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. And the thing is, the first step in this process was actually not the court case, it was the filing of the FOIA requests. And there were something like, I don't know, 9 or 10 of them that I filed. So all of those FOIA requests were sent to 6 different agencies. They were sent to the FBI, the DEA, CIA, the IRS, the Executive Office for United States Attorneys, and the State Department. So there's 6 federal agencies or components of agencies that handle FOIA separately. And so they all separately responded to those requests saying, well, we're not going to give you anything. Or we might give you something, but we're not going to give it to you until 2026. So have fun. And then at that point, once you have your denial, you can appeal to the agency. So in each case, I filed an appeal saying, I don't think you're correct. Please give me the records. Here's why you're wrong. And, have a nice day. So once you filed your appeals, and this all takes time, of course, there's, 30 days here and 30 days there. It adds up. It takes several months. Once those appeals were filed, then I eventually got back denials of the appeals. And the denials say, well, sorry, you didn't get what you want, but you can go to court. So that's what happened. I took the denials of the FOIAs, I took the denials of the appeals, I put them all together in a document, and I sent that to the court with a complaint, and that formed the lawsuit that is now ongoing. So the process is kind of weird for FOIA cases because a FOIA lawsuit is sort of a narrow, strange subset of all the different kinds of lawsuits that courts handle. Normally with a lawsuit, you'll have discovery, which means you can see the documents the other side has. But when you're dealing with FOIA, it's not really that the other side has documents about the facts of the case, like you're going for documents in the first place. So there is no discovery. There's just essentially back and forth with the attorneys, usually attorneys on the other side. And then you file a joint status report every so often to the court, JSR, as they call it. And we've already got one of those from September 11th. It's document 12 in the case. And so the joint status report says to the judge, like, here you have a list of things we've talked about and we've discussed these matters, and here's when we think we're going to be able to get these documents handled, and here's where we disagree. And then based on those joint status reports, the judge can order one side to do something or the other side to do something or no one to do anything and just wait. At this point, we're sort of in the waiting phase because the government defendants have said, these are the agencies that are handling the FOIA requests. They've said, well, some of us have no records. Some of us don't want to give up any records because in the CIA's case, they're saying they will not confirm or deny that there are any. But if there are, they're classified, so you're not going to get them. In the FBI's case, as we now know, they say that they have records, but some of these requests are about the drug ring in general. Some of these requests are about Bola Tinubu specifically. And they will produce records by analyzing 500 pages per month. Doesn't mean they're going to give up 500 pages, just means they're going to read 500 pages and decide how many of those they can provide.
Right.
And then I think the State Department has also said that they're going to read a certain number of pages per month. And then the DEA says it can neither confirm nor deny that there are records. And the Executive Office for U.S. Attorneys finally said they can't find any, but they didn't exactly explain how they came to that conclusion. And the IRS provided a very detailed declaration, not on the court docket, which I think is very strange, but to me by email, which I then posted, saying, we looked really hard for them and we couldn't find them, so we're pretty sure they're destroyed. So, each agency has a different response. And, these are from Nigeria, it may seem that they're all kind of the same, but from here in the U.S., these are all huge agencies on their own. The IRS is a massive agency. The FBI is a massive agency. So like they all have dozens and dozens of people working just on FOIA within one agency. So that's why the responses are a little bit disjointed, because there's a massive federal bureaucracy here, and you have to just talk to people individually.
So, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I have a lot of interesting questions here, and guys, we can only take as many questions as possible, and Aaron will do his best to explain things to us. So, just piggyback off what you just said. 2 out of the 6 responded to releasing these files, leaving us at 4 who said, you know what, I have nothing for you guys. Why was that? I mean, we have the FBI, CIA, IRS, State Department, U.S. Attorney, and I believe DEA. Only the FBI and State Department agreed to release something. Why?
Right. So some of these files are gone, like in the IRS's case, and there's nothing anyone can do about that. Once they're destroyed, they're destroyed. But for the other agencies that have something and they don't want to give it up, this is where those FOIA exemptions I was talking about come in. Because different agencies, they all have lawyers, right? Each agency has an army of lawyers working for it. And the lawyers at those agencies will look at the request and say, well, according to the law, we have to deny this because they fall into one of the legal exemptions in the FOIA statute. Statute means just law, basically. So because this document, let's say from the FBI, talks about exactly how we figured something out about this drug ring, that could identify maybe, and this is an example, sources and methods. And we're not allowed to identify sources and methods under the FOIA statute, and therefore we have to deny that part. So those agencies that are denying access to records are saying basically that they can neither confirm nor deny that records even exist, and that if they can affirm that records exist, personal privacy could be at stake. Now, there's sort of exemptions to the exemptions. This is the law, so things get crazy like that. One of the exceptions is that if you're dead, you don't have privacy rights. You're dead.
Oh.
So because it's believed that Muiza Kande is dead, he has no personal privacy under the FOIA statute. That is why if you look through this FOIA release, you'll see his name several times in these files, whereas other people's names are redacted, but Akande's name is not. That's because he has no privacy rights under the FOIA statute.
All right.
Another thing is that if you look at these white rectangles in the FBI document, those are the redactions. Some agencies use black rectangles. The FBI uses white rectangles. I guess it saves on toner. To the right side of the page, wherever there's a white rectangle, you'll see a notation on the right margin. And it'll say like B7E, B7C, B3, whatever it says. That code refers to the FOIA exemption that goes to that rectangle. So they're not going to tell you what information is under it necessarily, but they will sort of tell you why they redacted it. And there's a cheat sheet that tells you what the different exemption codes mean right after that letter from the FBI. So you can sort of cross-reference what those codes say with the FBI's explanation at the beginning.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Okay. I guess you've answered my second question. So let's move on to something that has people's minds burning. You've seen how the Nigerian judiciary operates. Kindly compare and contrast the difference between the US and the Nigerian judiciary system. I mean, what would you say is a flaw and a plus in regards to okay?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer this question. So I know a bit about United States courts, and I'm not a lawyer, to be clear, but I've been watching how the courts operate for some time, and so I know something about the courts here in the U.S. My experience with the Nigerian courts has been very limited. I've never been to Nigeria, and I don't know very much about how the courts there work. I will say that I was a bit surprised by the repeated rescheduling of hearings and judgments by the Nigerian Supreme Court in the past week or two. I think that was certainly something that does not seem to happen often, I think, anywhere. And it's also something I can say that our courts here in the US are not equipped to deal with. Courts in the US are very concerned about due process. It's in our Constitution several times, actually. There's the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and they both sort of highlight the need for time, essentially. You know, the reason courts are often so slow, and I'm not excusing it because sometimes they're way too slow, but you want time in order to make sure that everyone has had their say, and in order to make sure that you don't have the kinds of things that can happen in authoritarian regimes where people's lives are upended because a government agency has decided to do something right away, whether that's come into your home and take away something or physically harm you or, you know, take your money with no notice. So that's why there's this focus on due process. And so when you go to a United States court, as I just had to do, and you say, Your Honor, this court in another country has decided to do something tomorrow, that's very surprising. That does not happen often, because then there's no due process. Then, you know, no one can react, you know, by tomorrow. The judge in this case, for example, probably has, I don't know, between 1,000 and 10,000 cases on her docket, right? She's got a lot to look at. It's not just this one case that she's concerned about. And so the idea that she's got to make a decision about how to handle this by tomorrow, I mean, that's impossible. It's just not something that's reasonably going to happen, even in much more acute situations like with a death penalty case. I don't think a judge would be able to react that fast. So, you know, fortunately, that's not the situation here. It's a FOIA case. It's much more laid back by comparison. But that was very surprising. I will say that.
All right, thank you. My next question is a pretty dicey one. Do you feel the stonewalling in this case is as a result of Biden's administration trying to curry favors from Nigeria?
I don't. There may be some political considerations that the government is weighing sort of behind the scenes, but most of what I have seen is a result of the bureaucracy around FOIA. You know, there are, as I said at the beginning, that it's a very rigid interpretation of the law. The only thing that is not rigid when it comes to FOIA is the fact that they're supposed to have 20 days to respond to your request, 20 business days. But often that can take years. So that's the one thing no one pays any attention to, is the actual deadline. But everything else, the exemptions, are taken very seriously. I think that's a flaw in our system here in the US, but that is currently how it works. So I don't think it's really about politics at the end of the day. I think it's mostly just about, you know, the government not doing a very careful job at evaluating these requests.
All right. Okay, so this is going to be my last question. And this one is more about democracy. So America is very pro-democracy. We believe in democracy, but in Africa, you see America trying to export democracy in Africa. But in the US, it's the exact opposite. So why is it so applicable there in the US, but in Africa and in my country, Nigeria, it's like an exact opposite? I know you mentioned racism, but I would like for you to elaborate more.
I guess, what do you mean by opposite? Just so I understand your question.
I mean, in America, right, it's a very democratic state, at least from the outside, from my perspective. You see, it follows the laws and the rules of democracy. But when it comes to Africa, America applying the rules of democracy in Africa is the exact opposite. They don't follow the rules. Like I said, it's kind of like, oh yeah, we're going to extort you guys for what it is. Hence, when you mentioned racism, so I'm kind of picking back off.
Well, do you have an example? Like, I guess I don't know very much history of Nigeria. I'm afraid, so I don't necessarily know everything that's happened.
We have a lot of Nigerians in diaspora, right? And to the best of their knowledge, they believe, okay, this is a case concerning my country, Nigeria. Um, we have political ties. And like I said, when I asked you the question of, okay, do you feel it's a stonewalling situation, right? So from their point of view, they believe, okay, it's all good and fine. America must obey the rules. But when it comes to Nigeria, for example, you don't obey the rules. You don't respect the rules. Democracy does not seem to exist here. And when you want to intervene, you don't necessarily respect the laws of democracy. So it's kind of like, oh, America is trying to curry favor from Nigeria in this.
Well, here's what I can say. First of all, I am an American, but I certainly do not represent the United States government in any way. And of course, in this case, I'm suing the government. So I often do not agree with my own government in general. And so I don't doubt that what you're saying has often occurred, that the United States has gone into various countries, including countries in Africa, and done things that to any outside observer would seem hypocritical and anti-democratic. And generally, I oppose that kind of behavior, which is part of the reason why I filed this lawsuit. I don't know if that's what's happened here. I think from the Biden administration's perspective, and this is my speculation, my guess is that they are making efforts to not appear to prefer one side or another. I think they want to not be involved, is my guess. And so perhaps their inaction is looking like a deliberate choice to some people and maybe not to others. But I think the position of the administration, if you were to ask them, would be, we don't have a side here. We are just applying the FOIA statute. If that's true, I can't exactly say, but that is my guess as to what they would respond. As far as democracy goes, I can say we have a lot of challenges with democracy here in the United States. We just had Donald Trump as our president, a man who did not believe in the rule of law, did not believe in the Constitution, probably doesn't know what the Constitution says. Not that most people do, but I think he is an especially poor student of history. And so the challenges you're describing, I think, are challenges felt the world over. And what makes me concerned personally is that whenever you have a situation where someone with a history of corruption is put in charge of a large number of people, that's a recipe for disaster. It usually means that that person will ignore the rule of law in favor of their own interests. And that's what worries me about a person like Bola Tinubu. I don't know him. I don't know much about him except for the fact that he has a striking track record of money laundering and alleged criminal activity, not just alleged by anyone, but alleged by federal agents of the United States. So again, in order to fully understand his history with regard to this whole situation, you have to piece together 3 or 4 different dockets from different courts. There's the 1992 case, the 1993 case, and then there's 2 appeals that I've located in the 7th Circuit, which covers Illinois, I think Indiana also. So part of the reason I'm so interested in this case is that there has been a recent trend worldwide of sort of strong men coming to power in the US, in Europe, in South America, and now maybe in Africa. And that's quite alarming if you think that society is better off with laws. Laws are boring and sort of annoying a lot of the time, but they prevent everything from devolving into violence. And that's a really big benefit, in my view. So that's why I think it's worth the effort to make sure that the actual facts about Mr. Tinubu's history are known. It's possible that his opponents politically are just as bad. I don't know. I don't have anything to do with them. But the fact of the matter is that he's the one claiming to have won the election. And so he's the one that everyone has to deal with now. And that makes his case sort of exceptional.
All right. So we're going to wrap up very soon, guys. So I'll take one more question. And this question says, I know these questions are not particularly FOIA, right? But it is what it is. These questions need to be answered. So this is the last question. It says, should America not step in to prevent strongmen from emerging? I guess what this question means is what you just said in regards to okay, sorry, there is a follow-up question to this one. It says, okay, should America not step in to prevent strongmen from emerging? And it says the bad leaders emerge in our democracy and America turns a blind eye. Again, the situation of current favors. I wonder why this keeps coming up. It's more of a recurrence here.
Well, that's really a foreign policy question that, again, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer. The interests of the federal government here are complex because at various points we've had different presidents and different administrations that have placed values on certain aspects of our foreign relationships. Sometimes they've been more about oil, sometimes they've been more about peace and stability. And I don't think I can speak for the government when it comes to what the United States truly values right now in terms of its relationship with Nigeria. But it's certainly a complicated matter. And my hope is that by getting more information out there about Mr. Tinubu's history, we will all learn more about how that foreign policy negotiation back in the 90s was handled. Like, it's entirely possible that Mr. Tinubu had a relationship with the CIA, and that's why the CIA is classifying information regarding him and doesn't want to disclose it. I don't know if that's true or not. Obviously, the CIA won't tell us either way. But that's something that if I were a Nigerian citizen, I would want to know more about, because I think no matter what country you live in, you should want your leader to be accountable to the people of that country, not accountable to some foreign government that they have a relationship with. So again, we don't know the facts on that yet, and it's possible that this case won't answer that question in the end, but it's certainly something that is reasonable to ask about.
All right. And that's all the time that we have, guys. Thank you so much for joining the live. Thank you, Aaron, for
Thank you. I hope it helps clarify the case for people.
Yes, this whole live session was for us to hear your side of the story, because we know you, we know of you, but we've never really heard you talk about this case in this way. And okay, this is kind of like a promise question. And someone says, do you promise to come back to West Africa Week to talk more?
I hope to be able to talk. Often when you're in a lawsuit, you don't really want to talk about it very much. In this instance, I just thought it was important to make sure that the actual facts about what's happening get out, because a lot of the articles I've read in Nigerian media have not been entirely accurate. So I just thought it would be helpful to make sure people knew what was really going on.
All right.
I'll do my best to talk when I can. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and that is all the time that we have. We'll be having more of these sessions, so please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us across all social media platforms, and we will see you guys next time. Bye for now. Okay.